Friday, Pope Francis landed in Iraq on a first-ever papal visit. Latin America pays tribute to Commander Hugo Chavez on the 8th anniversary of his death. On Friday, Nigeria launched its COVID-19 vaccination campaign in Abuja. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. This Friday, Pope Francis arrived to Baghdad International Airport. With the motto, "We are all brothers," Pope Francis is making a historic visit to Iraq. The head of the Catholic Church will hold meetings with bishops, priests, religious men and women. One of the most significant ones will be with the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali al-Hussein al-Sistani. Described by the Pope himself as a long-awaited and much-desired trip, this will be Francis' first international tour after 15 months without mass public activities due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Iraq receives the Pope under siege by the U.S. military intervention and terrorism sponsored mainly by Western countries. At Baghdad International Airport, the Pope was welcomed by Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi. Both later held a meeting at the VIP lounge of the airport. Pope Francis was welcomed by Iraqi President Barham Saleh upon his arrival in the presidential palace. The Pope and the President held talks later on the private study of the presidential palace. Finally, Pope Francis met with different authorities, civil society and diplomats in the hall of the presidential palace, where both him and Iraq's president gave a speech. We go now to Iraq's capital, Baghdad, with our collaborator Javier Martinez Brocal to know about the latest updates on the historic visit of Pope Francis to the country.
This is one of the most symbolic places of this visit, the Church of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, that since 2010 has been called the Mother of the Martyrs. And it is here that a terrible terrorist attack took place on October 31st, 2010. There were some explosions outside that attracted the security forces, and several armed men entered this church and killed 48 Christians in 2 hours. The first to be killed were 2 priests, but they also killed 9 Muslims. The Pope here is going to remind that the problem is extremism, not religions, because all the people of Iraq have been affected by the murderous violence of the extremists. We are going to listen very carefully to the message that the Pope gives in these hours here in Iraq, because it is not only a religious message, but it is a geopolitical message to build peace in the Middle East and to overcome this crisis in the midst of the coronavirus.
On Friday, China urged relevant countries to face up to the call for justice from the international community and also to stop unilateral sanctions that go against human rights.
It has been shown time and again that unilateral sanctions have severe impact on the international political and economic order and the global governance system, severely undermine the ability of the sanctioned countries to mobilize resources, develop their economies and improve people's livelihood, endanger the right to life, challenge the right to self-determination and undermine the right to development, thus constituting persistent, systematic and large-scale violations of human rights. Against the backdrop of the global spread of COVID-19, unilateral sanctions have further exacerbated poverty, hunger and inequality by depriving tens of millions of people of food and medicine.
On Thursday, the Russian Foreign Ministry stressed that sanctions imposed by the European Union regarding the situation in Ukraine will receive a proportionate response from Moscow.
We consider the European Union actions as another missed opportunity to abandon the dead-end policy of ultimatums and pressure, finally moving on to the equal and mutually beneficial collaboration in relations with Russia. As you know, Russia won't leave the latest unfriendly European Union act without a proportionate answer.
And officials in New Zealand issued a tsunami warning for coastal areas after a shallow, powerful earthquake that struck off the northeastern coast on Thursday night. There were no immediate reports of serious damage or casualties. New Zealand's National Emergency Management Agency warned of a tsunami threat along the east of the country's North Island following the magnitude 7.3 quake. Also, Guatemalan civil protection authorities issued a moving reach warning Thursday off the country's coast to the Pacific Ocean, following information received by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. Meanwhile, Peru launched a tsunami alert on its coast, but without order to evacuate. United Nations Acting Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Ramesh Rajasingham, visited Burkina Faso on Thursday to assess the ongoing humanitarian crisis. The UN official reported that life-saving response must be scaled up to meet growing humanitarian needs in many parts of the country, and that credible, sustainable solutions are necessary to prevent this from becoming a protracted crisis with no end point in sight. The situation in Burkina Faso has been described as the world's fastest displacement crisis, with more than 1 in every 20 inhabitants forced to flee violence and attacks by armed groups in the north and the east of the country. Saturday will mark 100 days of mass farmers' protests in India that have seen tens of thousands demonstrate against 3 new laws liberalizing agricultural markets and spark large-scale clashes with police. The huge rallies have descended into deadly chaos, with clashes between police and protesters. The controversial reforms deregulate farm-produce markets that have for decades been organized by state bodies, with minimum prices guaranteed. The farmers, who have been camped on the outskirts of Delhi since late November, said the government's laws will put Indian conglomerates in control, threatening their livelihoods. Farming has long been a political minefield, with nearly 70% of the 1.3 billion strong population drawing their livelihood from agriculture. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. This March the 5th marks the 8th anniversary of the physical loss of the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution, Hugo Chavez, who left behind a legacy of struggle and resistance that is still alive in Venezuela and Latin America. The resistance of the Venezuelan people to the constant aggressions of the United States and its regional allies is an example of the validity of the humanist and social ideals of Commander Chavez. The Bolivarian leader built a project for the transformation of Venezuelan society, seeking to eliminate the structures of capitalism and promoting the values of socialism, freedom, equality, and solidarity. Despite the application of coercive measures, the Venezuelan government has continued with a profound social agenda initiated by Comandante Chavez to favor the majority of the Venezuelan people. The continuity of missions such as Gran Vivienda Venezuela, Barrio Adentro, the delivery of food through the supply committees, among other social actions, as a response to the profound social policy maintained during the more than 20 years of the Bolivarian Revolution. 8 years after the physical departure of Chavez, those who continue denouncing the excess of the capitalist model and condemning U.S. interventionists continue to remember the words of the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution. And several Latin American leaders offered words of remembrance to Hugo Chávez's legacy. Cuba's President Miguel Díaz-Canel tweeted, March the 5th, a day of remembrance and homage to Cuba's best friend, the unforgettable Hugo Chávez, who gave his energies to the Bolivarian dream of unity and also faced colossal challenges with admirable optimism. He always be an inspiration for the revolutionaries of the world. Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza also posted on Twitter, 8 years ago, in the midst of pain, I was able to hold the hand of Commander Father Hugo Chávez in his last seconds of physical life. I asked him to go peacefully and that he will always show the light to us to complete his work, that of Bolívar, that of the homeland, that of hope and equality. Also, former President of Bolivia, Evo Morales, wrote, 8 years ago, our brother Hugo Chavez, one of the greatest patriots ever born in the great homeland, a visionary, a revolutionary, and one of the commanders of the libertarian forces of America, passed to eternity. Our homage to his memory, Chavez lives. On Thursday, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean reported that in 2020, poverty and extreme poverty in the region reached levels not seen in the last 12 and 20 years, respectively. The rise in poverty was due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and came despite the emergency social protection measures that countries adopted to halt it. The annual report indicates that poverty is greater in rural areas, among children and adolescents, indigenous and Afro-descendant people, and in the population with lower educational levels. Meanwhile, the indices of inequality in the region worsened along with unemployment and labor participation rates, especially among women. The report also says that the increase in poverty and extreme poverty levels will be even greater in the absence of measures implemented by the governments to transfer emergency income to households. Given the situation, the Commission is calling to guarantee universal social protection as a central pillar of the welfare state.
That is important is vulnerability. This is something that we've referred to in other outlooks, and this has to do with social mobility. We could see that in Latin America, 491 million people were living on incomes up to 3 times the poverty line. That is to say, 8 out of every 10 Latin Americans are vulnerable, 79%, but it's 8 out of every 10 Latin Americans that face tremendous vulnerability, and therefore we absolutely need universal social protection systems.
Shopkeepers from a district in the Colombia capital, Bogota, protested this Thursday to demand that opening hours restrictions imposed due to COVID-19 come to an end, so they can resume the traditional Madrugón event consisting of early morning purchases made by wholesale merchants.
Wholesalers, on whom more than 192,000 people in the entire production chain depend, no longer have enough to eat, and we need to reactivate the economy of these families. The problem is that our traditional Madrugón, which means early morning sales event, normally takes place between 2 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Wednesdays and Saturdays, but we are currently constrained to work, like all businesses in Colombia, from 10 a.m. This means that wholesale buyers who would normally come to stock up to open their stores are not available to do so at this time.
And we'll have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Friday, Nigeria launched its COVID-19 vaccination campaign in Abuja, capital city of the African nation. The move comes after the most populous African country received almost 4 million vaccine doses through the COVAX initiative. The first person to be vaccinated was a doctor working at the National Hospital in Abuja. To date, Nigeria registers more than 157,000 COVID-19 cases and nearly 2,000 fatalities. Italy announced on Thursday it was blocking the export of vaccines developed by AstraZeneca to Australia, based on the European Union regulations. In a statement, the Italian Foreign Minister reported that the shipment of 250,000 doses was stopped due to the continued shortages of vaccines in the EU and Italy, and the delay in the supply of AstraZeneca. It was also noted that Australia is not considered a vulnerable country in the context of the pandemic. Authorities specified that Australia applied for the export permit on February 24th, and Rome forwarded it to the European Commission 2 days later, at the same time requested its rejection. The Director General of Cuba's Finlay Vaccine Institute, Vicente Pérez Bencomo, held a press conference on the vaccine candidates being developed in the country, noting the positive outcome of combinations of the Soberana vaccines to enhance immunity. He stressed that the candidates have met all the necessary requirements for their approval by the national regulatory authorities.
found the combination of this vaccine that really induced a very strong immunity in terms of neutralizing antibodies and in terms also of T-cell immune response that is actually very well recognized as an important contribution for protection. We are very happy because we designed nine months ago two vaccines of Soberana 1 and Soberana 2. And we are happy to see now that Soberana 2 is moving very fast to the phase 3, but Soberana 1 is still alive, and the effect of all the membrane vesicle that we've used since many years on the anti-meningococcal vaccine has a very important effect on the immunity for the SARS-CoV-2 antigen.
Venezuelan residents reacted after President Nicolás Maduro reported that a Brazilian variant of COVID-19 was discovered in recent confirmed cases in the country.
I am a little worried, but as long as I keep taking care of myself, I think I should be fine. However, there are situations that get out of hand, and I hope my immune system is boosted. Otherwise, let's prepare for whatever comes along.
I think the biggest problem is that people have already got used to the pandemic. So the habit has led to carelessness. That, for me, is the main source of danger for the Venezuelan people.
Peruvian authorities reported that the country is facing a multiple crisis, with the collapse of the health system, the loss of more than 3 million jobs, and 3 different presidents in a single week during the pandemic. The political and health crisis intensifies as the country prepares for presidential elections. Our correspondent, Veronica Insausti, brings us more details in the following report.
Everyone's life has changed. The pandemic emergency that was initially announced for 15 days in March 2020 persists until now, and in a worse context as during this period. 46,000 people have died, 3 million jobs were lost, 500,000 small and medium enterprises went bankrupt, GDP fell by 12 percentage points, and the lockdown increased violence and social conflict.
Oof, terrible. We're out there trying to make a living every day.
The fear for our health. We don't know who is infected and who isn't. How to go out on the street. Our whole life has changed. Nothing will ever be the same.
We are all in this situation. There are no jobs. They have pushed us out of work. We have families to support, children in school.
We are confined, and if we have a sick person, we have to keep them at home, because if we take them to a hospital, it is terrible. There is no way to know whether they are going to take care of you and treat you well, and secondly, the jobs.
The pandemic revealed all the shortcomings of a state that has operated under the neoliberal system for the past 3 decades. The health sector, which was already precarious, collapsed with the arrival of COVID-19, and in 1 year has not been able to overcome the lack of personnel or provide the necessary infrastructure to deal with the emergency.
Absolutely nothing has been done to improve the infrastructure. It's deplorable that today we lack oxygen in 14 regions of the country, including Lima, which is the capital. It is really terrible. There is no way to buy it, probably because they are filling cylinders on the 3rd or 4th day. And sometimes it is no longer useful because the patient has died. We are in the same condition or worse conditions than last year, and they continue to deceive the population.
The credibility of politicians is almost null, due to the corruption scandals that have been dragging on for more than 2 years, the Lava Jato and Lava Juez cases, former governors and state officials imprisoned in prison, and a total of 3 presidents during the pandemic period, all points to an unprecedented political crisis.
All this has distracted from the pandemic. All this aggravates the conditions in terms of addressing the pandemic. The crisis is not over. It is far from over. In Parliament there are political forces that are pushing to destabilize the parliamentary board, even the president himself, and all this plays against the answers that need to be provided at a time of emergency, at a time when there should be national unity. In Peru, what we have seen is huge fragmentation, and this will also be expressed in the elections.
Citizen rejection of the political class is reflected in the polls, where none of the 17 presidential candidates reaches 11% support, with just 1 month to go before the elections are held. Meanwhile, the number of COVID-19 deaths and cases is increasing by the day, and the majority of Peruvians who have seen the incomes plummet are managing as best they can to survive.
Verónica Insausti, TeleSUR, Perú.
And now we conclude this news brief with several images of Hugo Chavez as a humble but fair homage to the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution on the 8th anniversary of his death. Also, remember that you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
Se recupera y desde aquí le decimos a Fidel: adelante camarada, para que sigamos empujando el sol, que empieza la madrugada, que están cantando los gallos de un nuevo amanecer.
Como dijo Abraham Lincoln, ¿qué es la democracia? La democracia no es un sistema a través del cual una élite enriquecida explota a la mayoría empobrecida. No, la democracia debe ser, dijo Abraham Lincoln, gobierno del pueblo, gobierno por el pueblo y gobierno para el pueblo. A eso dedico yo y dedicaré todos los días de mi vida.